Hi, everybody. Welcome to our week 5, where we were talking about the First Amendment. A reminder that by the end of this week, we're going to have an exam that you guys are going to, or actually, I'm sorry, for next week, we're going to have an exam that you guys are going to have to actually take, and we'll go from there. All right. So, for purposes of that exam, um, my advice would be that you look at all the videos that I've put up. Anything that I said in one of my class videos is fair game for an exam question, as is the information that we have in our PowerPoint presentation slides. So I think that's how I would tackle it if I were you guys. I would review the class lectures that I know you guys have been watching very closely, and also um, review the PowerPoint presentations that we have been posting on these Google Classroom sheets, or I'm sorry, on Google Classroom. And that's how I would review for the exam if I were in your position. I will post more information on the exam itself um, when uh, the time comes. I'll probably post a separate class page for it. So let's begin. Uh, this chapter talks about the First Amendment, and if you're somebody who has taken me in comprehensive law or is planning on taking me in comprehensive law, I devote a good amount of time to the First Amendment because it really is one of the most important, if not the most important, amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and definitely probably the civil liberty that most Americans would consider to be the most important civil liberty. Excuse me. Now, when you are talking about the First Amendment, here it is, right? What this says is Congress shall make no laws restricting, um, and this actually is not the text of the Constitution, but what the First Amendment says is that Congress shall pass no laws abridging freedom of speech, abridging freedom of the press, um, establishing a religion over another, restricting a person's ability to worship freely, the right for the people to peacefully assemble, or the right to petition the government to redress grievances. That's much more closely aligned with the text of the Constitution and the First Amendment than what they've given you here as a more watered down version of what the First Amendment says. But however you want to define it, the First Amendment contains within it six total rights. Six total rights. So the first right, the one that most people are familiar with, is the right uh, to freedom of speech. And Congress cannot pass laws restricting a person's freedom of speech. The second right found within the First Amendment is the freedom of the press, meaning that Congress cannot pass laws that restrict the press from being able to publish newsworthy stories. The third and fourth rights deal with religion, but I personally don't like calling them the freedom of religion because they're two different rights. And I think many people like confusing or get confused if you simply tell them that there is a religious freedom. Instead, there are two rights that involve religion. We call them the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. And what they entailed is the Free Exercise Clause protects you from having the government pass a law that restricts how you may worship your religion. So, for example, if you are a Catholic, the government may not pass a law that restricts your ability to go and receive Holy Communion. If you are a Muslim, the government may not pass a law that restricts your ability to worship or pray at 5 different times in the day, and so on and so forth, right? The second right that is associated with religion is the Establishment Clause right, and this is the fourth right that we're going to be discussing within the First Amendment. And this Establishment Clause right, what it says is that the government cannot pass laws that create an official state religion or promote one religious group over another. This means basically that the government cannot favor one religion over another when they are passing laws. And then the fifth and sixth rights, the right for people to peacefully assemble, which means that people have the right to spend time and associate with whoever they want to. You can hang out with whatever friends you want to. You can go and meet with a group of people wherever you want. That's the right for people to peacefully assemble. The sixth right involves you having the right to complain to your government about issues that you're unhappy about. This is what we call, or the text of the Constitution says that you have the right to express grievances that you have towards the government. Okay, petition the government to redress grievances, meaning you have the right to ask the government to fix problems that you see with the government. Combined, these six rights form the First Amendment. Okay, so let's continue. The textbook wants to discuss these freedom of religion rights first. And again, I told you I don't like labeling freedom of religion. You're never going to hear me use the phrase freedom of religion. I don't like that term because in reality, there are two different rights. Okay, so what this states, what they're using here is they're talking about how people have the right to not have the government restrict their ability to choose which religion they want to worship. Meaning, you have the right to have the government be separate from the state. But that's very challenging to actually accomplish for many reasons. When you're talking about religion, like I said, Congress cannot pass laws that create a religion. Congress cannot pass a law creating a national religion. And you may not realize this, but this is a truly revolutionary concept because throughout most of world history, countries, specifically the governments of countries, had an official state religion. And even to this day, many countries still do. For example, if you were to go to England, the official religion of the British is the Church of England, which is Anglicanism. If you go to Saudi Arabia, the official religion is Islam. And if you actually look at the names of many Middle Eastern countries, they will call themselves the Islamic Republic of so on and so forth, because their official religion as a country is Islam, one of the different sects within Islam. And that's not something that you see here in the United States. In the United States, we don't have an official religion, Methodist, Episcopalianism, Judaism, Buddhism, Taoism. None of these religions are an official religion that represent the entire country. And that's something that is very unique to the United States. Now, when you're talking about the Establishment Clause, which is the first right that we're discussing right now, this means that Congress cannot pass laws showing preferential treatment to one religious organization over another. Okay, so for purposes of passing laws, Congress has to treat all religious groups equally. So what happens if a private citizen claims that the government has passed a law that violates their rights under the Establishment Clause to not have the government promote a religious group over another? Okay. Well, in order for the government to get involved with religion in any way, there are three rules that the government must meet. Number one, the law or government action must have a secular purpose. Number two, the purpose of the law can neither be to advance nor hurt religion. And number three, there cannot be excessive mixing or entanglement between the government law, the government action, and religion. And these three criteria were created as an Lemon test. The Lemon test was invented by the Supreme Court in the Supreme Court case Lemon versus Kurtzman. So These are the three criteria for uh, the Supreme Court and other federal courts to use when analyzing whether the government has um, broken the Establishment Clause right found within the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The second religious right that is found in the First Amendment, also the second right found within the First Amendment, is the Freedom Exercise Clause. And what this again means is that you have the right to believe whatever religion you want to believe in, and you have the right for you to engage in whatever religious acts that your religion believes in. Now, I need to caution you about something. All of your rights, even though they specifically, when written down, say that Congress shall not pass any law restricting, that's actually not true. The government has the ability to restrict your civil liberties because none of your rights are absolute, including religion. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take the Free Exercise Clause right? Where we're talking about the second right here of the First Amendment, the Free Exercise Clause. You have the right to worship your religion and not have government pass laws that restrict your religion. But imagine that you belong to a religious sect that thinks that every firstborn child should be killed at the age of 5. Well, obviously, your religious belief is not going to allow, the government is not going to allow your religious belief to kill a 5-year-old child. Okay, so there are limits to your rights. There is a limit to the Free Exercise Clause right. Even it's not absolute. None of your rights are absolute. However, for the most part, you have the ability to worship your religion as you see fit, based off of the criteria that your religion has promoted. The third right found in the First Amendment is the freedom of speech. And this means that you have the right to speak freely without being afraid that the government is going to punish you for speaking your mind. Okay? Many people confuse this or call this freedom of expression, freedom of speech. They don't actually use the phrase freedom of expression in the First Amendment, but the first freedom of expression right is frequently associated with freedom of speech. So let's look at what speech means, right? Speech can mean different things. Speech can mean pure speech, which is the speech that we normally think of when we're talking about speech, which is words, either verbal or written, that a person uses to communicate a message. Now, these are protected by the First Amendment, but in certain circumstances, the government may pass laws restricting your freedom of speech. Okay, I'll give you a few examples. The government can pass laws restricting your ability to defame a person. What is defamation? Defamation is when you intentionally make a false statement about somebody to hurt their reputation, right? When you say a lie about someone, that hurts that person's reputation. And defamation can either be written out, and that's known as libel, or it can be verbal, which is slander. So when you're talking about libel and slander laws, the government may restrict the ability of a person to engage in libel, to engage in slander. Again, collectively, these two are known as defamation. A second type of speech is known as symbolic speech. Now, symbolic speech is speech that expresses an idea or emotion without using words. This is also protected within the First Amendment. Okay, so for example, a person has the ability under the First Amendment to burn a flag. That is protected. Or that is an example. I'm sorry. That is true. But flag burning is an example of symbolic speech. Cross burning is an example of symbolic speech. Nude dancing is an example of symbolic speech. But not all of them are going to be protected. Out of those 3 examples that I listed, flag burning is the only one that is protected and that a person may engage in. Cross burning, you're going to discover that a state may choose to restrict a person's ability to burn crosses because there is very harmful consequences associated with people burning crosses. It's very intimidating towards particularly African Americans, but also other religious groups such as Catholics and Christians who were also targeted by the KKK. And nude dancing is considered obscene and not allowed in the United States, or in most places in the United States. Even though it's a form of potential symbolic speech, that is also not allowed. Now, your constitutional rights, like I said earlier, they're not absolute. There are reasonable limits where, in certain circumstances, if the government has a legitimate interest, they may be able to restrict what a person says and what a person may say. Frequently, these restrictions are found during times of war. Okay, so if you're trying to potentially interfere with the government's ability to get involved, to promote a war effort or to conduct a war effort, sometimes the Supreme Court and federal courts have found that Congress and the federal government may pass laws punishing you for doing that. So, burning a cross in front of a black family may be protected speech. I've also read the opposite, so I'm confused as to why the textbook is saying that, because my understanding is that cross burning in front of an African American family specifically was not allowed. We'll ignore this topic for the moment. I won't ask you about cross burning for the test. I'll look into this and see whether the textbook is right and I'm wrong, or whether I'm wrong and the textbook's, whether I'm right and the textbook's wrong. And I'll get back to you by next week. Now, Miller versus California is a very interesting case that involves obscenity. Obscenity is a very controversial issue and is something that is not protected for the most part within the Constitution. But to define what obscenity is, the way that the Supreme Court has defined obscenity is whether an average person that applies contemporary community standards finds that the dominant theme of the material taken as a whole applies to prurient interest, which means the tendency to excite lustful thoughts. That's a mouthful. Long story short, if there is something that is labeled as being obscene, then governments may restrict the ability of a person to engage in obscene behavior. The issue is that it's very hard for the government to be able to convince a court that a specific behavior is considered obscene, which is not protected under the U.S. Constitution. Now, in addition to obscenity, if the government finds that there is clear and probable danger that a person's words are going to potentially incite a riot, then the government may restrict that speech and punish the person promoting that speech because it could incite lawlessness, disorder. And there are different tests that have been used throughout America's history. The one that they're talking about here is the clear and probable danger test, defined that as if the gravity of the evil is discounted by its improbability, justifies an invasion of free speech necessary to avoid any danger. That's a lot. Yeah, I really dislike how they phrased it here. I don't plan on testing you on the clear and probable danger test or on the imminent lawless action test, so we're going to move past this. I'm gonna move past this as well. Now, as public employees, the law enforcement officer speech is protected under the First Amendment only if it is a matter of public concern and unrelated to employment. So, if a law enforcement officer is speaking as a police officer in their official title, their speech is protected only if the issue is of a matter of public concern and not related to employment. Additionally, and this is something that many of you may want to know, the First Amendment actually protects a citizen from being able to record an officer performing their duties in a public place. So, if a police officer pulls you over and you believe that they're not treating you the way that you should deserve or should be treated, and you want to file a complaint, you could actually be tape recording the police officer, and that is protected under the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Freedom of the press is related to freedom of speech. Now that we're talking about the fourth freedom found in the U.S. Constitution, or in the First Amendment, I'm sorry, of the U.S. Constitution. Freedom of the press is related to freedom of speech because obviously the press relies on words. But what freedom of the press covers is the freedom of the media to publish news articles, publish news stories, right? Now, the right to publish is not absolute. There are a few situations where the government may be able to restrict the right to publish before, and in other words, they don't allow the press to release the information. Usually they involve wartime issues. So, for example, if the government if the New York Times wants to publish an article that shows the war plans that the United States plans on using in a pending war against a country, the United States government may prohibit the New York Times from publishing that story because it affects national security and could put American soldiers at risk if the other country discovers our plans for invasion or for attacking them. So there are certain circumstances when the government is going to be allowed to restrict the press and pass laws that restrict the press. However, for the most part, the press is going to be given a wide range of latitude to be able to cover newsworthy stories. The fifth right is the right to peacefully assemble. Okay. And what this means is that combined with the freedom of speech and the Fourth Amendment, people have the expectation that they can gather with other people, hang out with other people, talk among themselves, and share ideas. Okay. It's related to freedom of association, which is not expressly stated in the First Amendment. This means you have the right to hang out with whoever you want. It also means you have the right to not hang out with people you don't want to hang out with, right? So, like, if a person wants me to hang out with them and I don't want to, I have the right to not hang out with that person. It's not explicitly stated within the First Amendment, but it is implied within the First Amendment, related to the concept of peace, the right that you have to peacefully assemble with other people. Again, the fifth right within the First Amendment that we're talking about. The textbook isn't going to really emphasize a lot about this, but again, I want you to remind you the sixth right is the right that you have, and the First Amendment is that you have the right to complain to government to fix issues that you're unhappy with regarding the government. The government cannot punish you if you're trying to complain to them or you're trying to ask them to change the way that they conduct their business. This is revolutionary because in other countries throughout the world, in most of world history, you have not been able to complain to the government when you have felt the government has wronged society or wronged you in some way, shape, or form. To this day, most of the countries of the world, or many countries of the world, don't give you the option of being able to complain to your government. Look at China. Look at the Middle East. Okay. Look at communist countries, Cuba, Venezuela. You don't really have the option of being able to tell the government, hey, you know what? I don't like what you did. You're wrong. Change this. In the United States, you do have that right. That's the sixth right, which is not listed here. That sixth right is, again, the right that you have to petition the government to redress grievances. Redress is a fancy word to fix. Grievances is a fancy word meaning complaints. So you have the right to petition or request the government to fix issues that you're unhappy with. That's the sixth right of the First Amendment. Okay. And I don't particularly care about this slide. So we are done. Make sure you guys study for that test. I'll put more information on Google Classroom regarding the test so that you guys can have more information for it. Bye, guys. Stay safe. See you next week.